In this quick little video, I'm going to show you how I use the Audacity application to edit the beginning and end of audio recordings of yoga classes that I've taught, as well as boosting the bass a little bit and maybe cutting out, like if I have a bad cough, or if something happens that was unexpected, somebody knocks over a water bottle during Shavasana or something like that. I mean, if you want to edit that kind of thing out, you're certainly free to, and this quick little video will explain how to use Audacity because it's a free application. It runs there's a version for Windows, there's a version for Mac, and I thought that it would be a good example of an app to use to edit audio files. Once you've downloaded and installed Audacity, you can launch the application, and then from the menu you would click File, Open. You would open the MP3 or the audio file that you wanted to edit. The application will process for a few moments as it reads the MP3 and opens it up for editing within Audacity. Once Audacity is completed opening the file, you will see the waveform shown on your screen as you see here. There's a couple of important things you need to know. This little icon here is the selection tool, and you will need to click that. You see how it's gray, it's darker than the other ones. That shows that it's automatically selected. It's been automatically selected as the tool, and you will need that in order to drop into the sound file, to click into the sound file in order to select portions of it or to put breaks in the audio file so that you can delete the beginning and delete the end. I typically set my recorder recording well before any students show up in the studio, so I don't have to start it once class begins or just before class begins because it's already recording. And the same thing after class. I let it run well after the students have gone, and then I'll turn it off. And so when I bring the file into Audacity, there's a lot of audio at the beginning and the end of the class that I need to trim. You can tell by the look of the WAV file where there's the majority of the class is being spoken because of the thickness, if you will, of the WAV file. You can see visually that there's a lot more going on here than there is here at the beginning of the file or at the end of the file. So what I have done is I have clicked the zoom tool so that I can zoom into the audio file, the WAV file, and begin to get in a little bit closer, and from here I can use the selection tool and begin to play back the audio file and see whether or not this is the correct starting point in the WAV file itself. Preview. Good morning. So once we've figured out where the beginning of our WAV file is going to be, we can take the selection tool and drop it into the WAV file. We'll say that this is the beginning. And from here you will click Edit, Clip Boundaries, and say Split. So you've created a clip boundary. In this point, you've just basically separated the beginning of the file, which is the junk that you don't want, from the actual part of the file, which is what you do want. I double-click the selection of the WAV file that's the beginning, the quote-unquote beginning of the WAV file that we started with, and I'll hit Delete on my keyboard. So what I've done is essentially deleted the junk from the beginning of the WAV file that I do not want. I've reselected the zoom tool, and I'm going to hit... When I hit Shift on my keyboard, it changes it from a zoom in to a zoom out. You can see the difference between zoom in and zoom out. And I'm going to zoom out on my WAV file until it fills the entire screen. So it will make it easier for me to zoom in to the tail end of the audio. It's pretty clear that this is the end of Shavasana. The closing part of class should be right around here. Open your mouth and stick. Almost there. Let's see, it's probably right here. Bring your thumb knuckles to your forehead center. Right, so we know that the end of the class should be right around here. Yes, and what I tend to do at the end of the class, where everybody gives himself a big round of applause for the great work that we did, I'll click the selection tool and I will highlight that section of the audio, and I will click Effect, Fade Out, so you can see how it adjusts the audio to a fade out, and then I will click Selection Tool, click the end there and say Edit, Clip Boundaries, Split, double click the tail end of the file that we do not want, and hit Delete on the keyboard. So I'm going to go back into the zoom selection tool, hit shift to zoom out to fill the screen with the one wave file so that we've got the one wave file. This is our finished file from beginning to end that we're going to edit and save it as an MP3. We could save it as a FLAC file, and those are two different types of audio file formats. Some websites that you send your audio files to will want them as MP3s, others will want them as FLAC files, and I believe Bandcamp wants a FLAC file and Mixcloud wants an MP3. If you're going to use your MP3s as any kind of podcast, they need to be an MP3 format. So there's a few more things that I will do to the file before I save it. I will change it from a stereo track to a mono track. And I do this because spoken word, it's not necessary that it be in stereo. It makes the file size smaller, which is useful if you're paying by the file size for MP3 hosting, if you're going to do this in a podcast distribution. It also is helpful to have the smallest file possible because websites that allow you to upload your stuff for free, it's usually restricted by the file size of the file that you're uploading. There's a certain file size that it has to be less than. So at this point I have the mono file. I could go through it and double check how it sounds. I could make sure that my audio isn't clipping. If my audio is clipping, I would see in the playback, let me click into here.
And fly.
You'll see here in the green where it goes into green to red. If the audio is too hot, we can double click the whole file and select the whole file and say Effect, Amplify, and reduce the audio volume, the amplification of the audio, by -1. We could reduce it by -3 if it's really loud, and we're reducing the amplification of the audio file in decibels. So small numbers, you're not going to reduce the amplification by something like 10 decibels. You would reduce it by either 1 or 3 to start with. So I'm going to just start with -1 to reduce the amplification, and you'll see that the tops and the bottoms of the wave file will get smaller on the screen once the amplify process is completed. Now that the amplify process is completed, one of the other things that I tend to do is increase the bass to the audio file, because in studios the recording can come across as a little bit thin, a little bit too mid-range. So I like to increase the bass a little bit of the spoken voice track to make it sound a little better to your ear. So I typically increase it by 3 decibels. Your mileage may vary. You may want to adjust it, and you can either preview it so you can see how it sounds before you apply the effect, or you can just go ahead and apply the effect if you know that it sounds good when you increase it by whatever numbers you fill in here. I recommend hitting the preview button and seeing how it sounds before you spend the time to process the entire file with this bass increase setting. I'm going to click cancel at this point and continue on to explain how to export this file into a format that is suitable for uploading to Mixcloud, Bandcamp, or hosting in a podcast format. To export the audio from Audacity, click File, Export Audio. From here, we can give it a file name. I'm just going to call this test.flac, and the file format down here is FLAC. Don't worry about the options. Just let the default options be. You don't need to change anything like that in here. When I click Save, the system will prompt me to fill in the tag values for the artist, the track title, the album title, the track number, year, genre, and comments. These are all values that will show up when the file is played back on, say, a phone or an MP3 player or an audio file player. So you can populate this information with your name, the name of the studio that you teach at, the title of the recording for the day. You can put the year and information into it. You can also set a template so that this information can be pre-populated, and I have done that. I have saved a template, so now that I have saved the template, I can load the template. I named it JTY, and you can see it pre-populates these fields with this information so that I don't need to fill those out every time. The only thing I'll need to do is increment with the track number, because each new file that I create is a new track number, if you will, and then the track title will be the title of the reading that I chose, or whatever the concept was around that day's class. So I'm going to just put in test here, and test here just to fill those fields out. And when I click OK, the file will begin to be exported and saved to the location that was specified when I clicked File, Export Audio. Now that we've exported the file as a FLAC, we will begin to export it as an MP3, and I'm going through this specifically to explain there's one little thing that you should know when you're exporting files as an MP3. There are some rules of thumb and best practices in order to submit audio files for podcasting, whether it be in Google Play or iTunes Store. Again, I'm just going to call this test.mp3. And from down here at the bottom, I'm going to choose file format as MP3. Under the options, the settings that you should change from the default are to a constant bitrate mode, make the quality 96 kilobits per second, and then the channel mode can be stereo. These are the settings that are recommended for creating MP3s for podcasts. So go ahead and click OK. The file will begin to be exported. You'll be prompted again to fill in the tags. It will use the tags from the last file that you exported. So once you set the tags to export to FLAC, those tags will be carried over to your next export in your Audacity session to export to MP3. One more thing that I should mention is the application that I use to edit the ID3 tags and to put in the album art when I generate the MP3 files and put them in Libsyn. And Libsyn is an online hosting site for MP3 files, which facilitates the process of getting my MP3s into Google Play and iTunes Podcast. The application that I use to edit the ID3 tags is called Tagr. It works on Mac, and it's an application where we can drag files into the field on the right, and we will see all of the tags that have been set in the files, and you'll also see if there's any artwork that's been set inside the MP3 file. So I've opened the folder where I exported my test MP3 and my test FLAC file. We're not going to worry about the album art that's embedded into the FLAC file. We're just concentrating on the MP3 because that's what we're going to be uploading for podcast sharing purposes. So when I drag the MP3 file into Tagr, you can see that it will populate the fields with the information that I set in it, and I can drop an image here to set the album artwork that you would see either in the file when it's previewed. You can see that there's album artwork in these files, or through iTunes or Google Play, the artwork that's displayed for the podcast. There are some rules of thumb published out on the internet that I use to follow in order to set up my podcast art to be the correct size. As we can see here, I will bring up the details of this file, and we can see that this is a 1400 by 1400 pixel image, which I edited in Photoshop and saved so that this will be the cover art that you see for all of the MP3s that I post to Libsyn, which are then shared into iTunes and Google Play Podcast. From here, if I want to put this album art into this test MP3 file, I just simply click and drag and then say Save to Disk. And we can see now that I have saved a disk, we can see the little thumbnail representation of the test MP3 file now shows the cover art that I dragged into the Tagr app and then saved inside that MP3's file properties. So those are the three major steps: edit the file, trim the beginning, trim the end, make the stereo mono, export to FLAC, export to MP3, adjust the MP3 output settings to be a continuous bitrate 96 kilobits, and then use an app like Tagr to embed your artwork as well as all of the tags of your audio recordings before you share them into a podcast service.